Welcome to Hyper Live. So this week's episode, we have our special guest, Rob Cousins. Welcome, Rob, and co-host Daniel. And the
G'day.
topic for today is working with complexity, and we're going to dive into complex adaptive systems thinking and but sort of explain what that is and why that's relevant and important. But perhaps to start, Rob, I'll pass over to you if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Thanks, Gareth. Thanks, Gareth and Daniel, for a chance to come along and talk to you. My name's Rob Cousins. I've worked in all sorts of sectors over the years, from insurance to retail. I've done outdoor adventure sports and government policy. And the thing that sort of unites all of that has really always been finding pathways and clear direction through messy situations, or how do you find more effective use of technology and how that interfaces with people to actually improve performance. So it's very much in the sort of, how do we create momentum here with what we've got or what we're trying to create and do, which is how people interact with the systems that are around them.
Nice. And Daniel, I'll let you do the usual intros.
Yeah, hi everyone. So Daniel, founder of Great CTO, and also an associate principal with Hyper, and work with the Hyper team quite often. And welcome to the show, Rob. I'm really interested to talk complexity with you because with the consulting that Gareth and I do, we're often talking with organizations grappling with the symptoms of the fact that they are complex adaptive systems. So yeah, where are we going to start the conversation, Gareth?
Well, maybe that's a good place to start, just to describe what we mean by a complex adaptive system and why it's a bit different. So yeah, Rob, do you wanna have a crack at that one?
Yeah, I guess there's a few academic schools of thought that you can go to for complexity. Dave Snowden's Cynefin framework is always a good start point. You know, he talks about the difference between complicated and complex things. Like a complicated thing, you can sit down, scratch your head, and get to an answer from. Like a good amount of analysis and research will tell you what your options are, and there's a pathway here. But you move into something complex when you can't really do that. You know, maybe there are different parts of a system are sort of interacting more at random, or you get emergent properties. So emergent properties is not the sort of result of something happened that was planned. It was more like an economy is emergent. Like you can change the interest rate, but then you wait and see what happens, and then you do it again and wait and see. It's a sort of emergent property. And so
Yeah.
complex systems are full of emergent things where individual parts are sort of acting in concert and in synergy in some way, but you can't coordinate it, analyze it, or control it, well, successfully anyway. This is probably where I'd start defining that.
Yeah, that's a great explanation. One of Dave Snowden's phrases I think he uses is cause and effect can only be known in retrospect, which is it makes you think a bit, doesn't it? So you're dealing with a system where independent agents are doing things that you can't control, and so you can't actually predict with a high degree of certainty what the outcome is from an action, which is, so yeah, if you think about that in the context of work, then you can have some quite interesting effects on how you behave as a leader or how you work as a team, right?
Yeah, I think sometimes you could get quite technocratic with what's complexity, but the reality is it's around us all the time. Like in health and safety, they sort of like to get into complexity because nothing works as a set of procedures really. And the example that they often use is just going around town, like whether you're driving a car, riding a bike, waiting to get on the bus. Like you actually have no idea what's going to happen next. You could have the best plan in the world or be the best driver or best cyclist ever, but at some point someone's going to do something that's slightly out of left field, maybe a bit crazy, that interferes, and you've got to respond, and your response then affects everybody else that's in there. Like that's a complex adaptive system that you're in, or in the workplace. Say you're in a logistics warehouse where you're, moving boxes from one big shelf on a forklift to another big shelf and then trying to get them over to the loading bay. Sounds really straightforward at one level, but what if the forklift battery is dead? What you going to do? Or the pallet that it's on is slightly broken, or something, just because of something else that happened. It's all these situations where we have to make decisions about what to do and how to be. It turns up all over the place.
Mm-hmm. The traffic one is a great one, and it's one of the more transformative things, I think, in traffic for all us civilians driving around has been, Waze and Google Maps and these sort of real time, feedback systems that we've got, where we're seeing about the traffic conditions, and where the computer is helping us choose a different path when traffic worsens. So, yeah, great example.
Yeah. Well, that, I guess, is like a nice way of how people interface with the technology there, though, isn't it? Like if you're driving around, you put your route into Google Maps. I want to go from here to here, and you get a third of the way, and the traffic starts to build up. You didn't know that at the start, but it'll beep at you and it will ask you, do you want to go this way now? It'll save you 5 minutes. But it sets you up to make better decisions. But you as the person still have to choose how to adapt. Maybe I don't want to take that detour because I was actually going to pick Johnny up over here, so I still want to keep going. And so it's quite, I guess the thing with complexity is, I think, how are we setting people up to function well in a complex system? And technology is fantastic for helping to coordinate or simplify or create visual layers for us to be able to engage with a lot more information. But the purpose of that is to help us make better decisions. And Google Maps is great, but there's also in the logistics industry, truck drivers end up with immense amount of technology in their cabs, because every solution is do something with technology to provide information to the driver. But we also know that too much technology in the cab is a distraction from being able to drive on the road. So you get these sort of tensions really about how do all these things fit together to help someone do their job, perform the task that they need to do, and perform it well.
Yeah, it's a great point. I think made me think of a couple of things actually in terms of that Cynefin framework with Dave Snowden. I think the way he presents that as a decision-making framework where the first thing you have to do is actually figure out what kind of domain you're in. So, and then you can act differently depending on the domain you recognize you're in. And I think that's been something that I've found really, really useful working with organizations. But maybe, Robert, how do you use these things sort of practically in your work, or how do you differentiate between the different domains, and what does that mean for the work that you do?
I find the Cynefin stuff so useful. Like you say, recognize what situation you're in. If this is complicated, then I need to really understand what's happening and think it through, and that's quite useful if we can do that. But as soon as you've got these sort of emergent properties in a system, you just can't do that, however much you might prefer to or wish you could. Then recognizing that we're not in that space, we are now in somewhere where we have to act and then respond and then review, and that's what Dave Snowden would say. But ultimately, I think it comes down to sort of the people's understanding of what's happening, not just my assessment of we're in this one now. Like, do people believe that we're in that kind of space? So, and thinking with some of the sort of technology tools that I've used in the past, there was a safety feedback loop technology that we brought. It was basically a sort of web-based app that people would plug into in their phones. And I guess because the work that these people were doing was complex, like were sort of emergent things happening, they had to respond. They couldn't stop and go and look at the manual, go and ask someone else. They had to make their own decisions. And so we started to just ask different questions through there, which were things like, when you're making trade-offs, do you feel like you make good trade-offs? Or were you set up for success here? Because instead of looking at rule following or the single thing that you need to do to save everything here, you're starting to look at the capacities that the teams have got or the people have to be able to respond. And so thinking about the trade-offs you've got to make, we all have to do that all the time. So are we making good ones? Are we making good ones often enough? But that kind of question, it gives you a lot to talk about where you can improve. Because, you're not always going to make the best trade-off. But if you're consistently not doing it, then you've probably got something to talk about in terms of how well people have the tools to do their job, have the right incentives on them to be able to do it, etc. Or if you took something like, is this set up for success? Like who doesn't want that anyway? But if you start asking that question to people that you work with or that or even doing things around the house, like going up a ladder to clean your gutters out or something, like if you genuinely ask yourself that question, how many times you actually feel like this is set up to go well, will probably surprise you how few it actually is. But
I love
I might-
the idea of feedback there as well. It's such a valuable kind of mechanism, and regardless of what type of work you're doing. But as you kind of go around to a more complex kind of domain, I think feedback becomes even more important.
I wonder what it tells us. Like the fact that our organizations are complex adaptive systems. What does it tell us about how we should approach, change within our organizations? I think that's the area that I'm thinking about. Like having a big project that's quite deterministic against a large change within an organization. Does that make sense?
yeah, I've been struggling with the change word these last few years because it's got quite a lot of stigma next to it. Are we going to use ADKAR, or I've learned ProCycle, or use that method? And I feel like there's utility in those, like they're useful things. I'm glad they exist in the world, but I also think that if you're using one of those methods, you're telling people what to do. We've got a new thing. It's going to be like this. We're going to do our awareness, our knowledge, blah blah blah, and then people will be doing it. And the thing with complex systems is that people need to make decisions in the moment. Not every process will apply to every situation everywhere. So you have to make changes and adapt. And I'm not sure that those methods give us people able to adapt in situations. What you really need is a authority delegated to the person who needs to be able to make the decision about whatever that thing actually is. And so I've started to think about change more as how can we build some momentum in a team or a bunch of teams. So if you think of like the sort of process or supply chain that goes through an organization, how do we build momentum for people to be working differently? And an example of that was a logistics firm that we were helping out. They really wanted to improve the way that their staff were sort of filling out their dockets at the end of moving containers around, because it helped them understand what container was where and so on, all sorts of reasons. And they were struggling to get the teams to do it. And when you got them together and talked them through, like they didn't mind doing it. The difficulty was when things got really busy. And the irony was that's when they needed the dockets done most. So but when you started to get underneath, the thing that would provide momentum for them was a better schedule of containers coming into the yard. And a better schedule was actually controlled by the people that did all of the scheduling team, basically. But they were through 2 steel doors, each with a security tag, up the stairs in a building on the other side of the site. They were never going to get there. But by thinking about change as not, here's the docket, we fill it out like this, we put it here, which would be a process change. But thinking about it as, building momentum in teams was, we just got to go over there and talk to them. We've got to build an understanding of what happens there and what happens down here and how those things affect each other, and build a feedback loop. And
I like the idea.
How
it's a great concept, isn't it? And so you're sort of influencing, or you're trying to, you're kind of influencing the environment or the ecosystem you're working in, but you don't build the path and expect people to walk across it. You try and influence in the right direction, and then you wait to see where people are mostly walking, and then if it's close enough, then you build a path. But it's that sort of, you're almost inverting the way you're thinking about that change, aren't you?
Yeah, I guess, Daniel, you were sort of saying earlier about, I guess, the role of people in change in change programs. And I feel like you got a choice about how you see people. Like most leaders will say, people are my greatest asset. But when you ask, what do you do to support your greatest asset, you usually get, well, we've got these targets and incentives that drive them. And like, all right, well, you're driving your greatest asset now. You're not empowering it. And or we've got these policies that limit what people can do. And so, okay, it doesn't harness an asset. And so I think you can see people as a problem to manage. We have to create compliance, and that is like, follow this process or something. Or you can see people as a solution, and you can say, we've got a tricky situation here. We need to figure out how we're going to deal with this. And it's not to say that you can see 100% of people like a solution. There's always tricky stuff, stuff like that. But where's your base setting on that one? And how are you setting up your organization for people to be solving problems for you, instead of needing central teams to be able to be running around doing that? And I feel like that's a sort of a big sort of piece of deep code, I suppose, in our organizations for managing complexity. If you see people as a problem, we're going to manage them. We're going to do that with policies, constraints, and so on. Then I'm not sure that you're going to create an adaptive teams that can solve problems. It doesn't mean let's not have policies and stuff, but where's the balance of how we're enabling people, setting them up to do the work that they need to do, etc.
You've used the phrase deep code, Rob, which I've seen you use in some of your articles and things online. Can you tell us just a little bit more about what you mean by deep code?
I guess it's really about the way that we choose to do things. Those sort of really deeply wired in things, about the way that we tend to see the world. Some people are afraid of technology and don't want to use it, or that's their sort of implicit belief here, is that this stuff's going to threaten my work, or this stuff's going to threaten the way of living, or something like that. Some people view AI in that way, don't they? And others don't. Others are sort of early adopters, ready to harness. That's like an example of deep code. And another example might be, most organizations have got, somebody who's been there for 25 years and just knows how everything works, irrespective of what policies, procedures, and everything else are. You just go to Brian because he knows. And that's a version of deep code. And if Brian left for whatever reason, you're all going to be stuck. And, So it's like these sort of the unwritten rules that seem to guide the way that we go about things.
So how the organization actually works rather than how, it was supposed to work.
Mm.
Yeah, I think so. It's like, yeah, what actually really happens around here, based on what? Yeah.
Do you think there's a shift in emphasis? We've got, I mean, this has been an idea around for a while, but the idea of organizations, startups can become big companies very, very quickly. And there's a lot more change in terms of the business environment. And that's sort of pushing us towards emphasizing the value of innovation more in organizations, which then kind of leads to what's the culture that actually supports innovation versus stability and bureaucracy. Bureaucracy is not bad in itself, but it's hard to have a culture of innovation working very closely together with a culture of bureaucracy. Do you think those sort of things are related?
Yeah, I think so. I think with innovation, it's important to be clear. What does innovation mean here in this context? Whatever company you are, or there's because it might be a way of working. We want cross-functional teams now that do small things instead of big change programs run from the center. That's a way of working. It might be new products. That's very much an Apple thing, isn't it? We made a new whiz bang thing. This is innovation, and but it also might be just something about unlocking capacities, for example. Which is we want people to feel empowered to solve their problems. And I think someone said to me a while back that the thing with innovation is if you don't define it, people don't really know what to do.
No, that's right.
You line people up on a line. This was his story. Jim Scully, that's who it was. And he said, line people up on a start line, fire the starter's pistol that goes innovation, and you'll get a couple of people that sprint forward. But you'll get some people that, freeze. You'll get some people that run sideways. Some people run backwards. Without that, what is this for us? It doesn't provide the direction for people to be moving in, so that it's got purpose or utility for whatever it is that you're trying to achieve. And in that respect, I think innovation and bureaucracy can fit together. I've worked for an innovation function in a regulator, and there it was all about let's find ways to cut through the bureaucracy where it makes sense to try new things. We can manage our risk appetite around that, like make it big enough to learn from, but small enough that it can go wrong and we're fine. I found it.
Yeah,
We've seen that examples with some of the companies we engage with, where there's great innovation happening within the organization, but some of the bureaucracy is blocking it, and then elsewhere a department is saying, hey, let's start a new innovation initiative, and it's the one and the same group that is blocking the innovation that is actually closely aligned to the purpose of the organization in the first place. So yeah, I think that's a great takeaway of let's define what innovation means for our organization as a starting point.
Yeah, and then multiple types.
You got to right size it as well, I think. In that a lot of sort of change questions or even sort of technology solutions, they often start to get bigger quite quick, don't they? Because the problem becomes more pervasive. It's one company I was helping that they hated this problem. It was our way of allocating skills and resource to projects is a nightmare, and the problem just became bigger and bigger because so many features of it didn't work. They were causing inefficiency, unhappy staff, and then the problem got bigger. The kind of solution that it needed was even bigger still because it was a whole new system. That's going to kind of have to close the business for 6 months now while we figure out what on earth this thing is. And it's like the leaders don't want that problem either. Like you're giving them something that's too hard. But when you got into the nature of that, and it turns out there were a lot of things that they could improve using or just amending or augmenting their sort of systems and platforms for managing it with the extra things that people could do. This group of people could talk about this thing here twice a week, and then that would create an improvement. And it really sort of de-escalated how big a problem that actually was, to make it much smaller. And being able to think to make small scale changes, but quickly, where they can multiply or be happening in many different places at once. It can be a very powerful way of bringing change. It's
Yeah.
maybe less visible at the start, but you can get going before you've got your use cases going.
Yeah, that's right. I think there's a lot to learn from, the Toyota production system was a great sort of example of that. I can't remember, it was a staggering number of improvements that people would come up with every year that were actually implemented within that, and lots of small changes leads to great kind of system efficiency or improvements. It's interesting though as well, the idea of that's the sort of sustaining innovations, the things you do to improve everything about what you're already doing in terms of your products or services, but then it's breaking free of or finding fresh revenue or exploring that sort of new uncharted areas. And that's always feels like it's sort of you have to do more things differently to be able to do that within an organization. You kind of got to think about how people are working, the process, the people's capabilities in the process, technology, the behaviors, all those things that sort of fit together. I mean, but do you see different types of how do you approach those two different kind of problems in terms of gradual innovation or gradual change for existing products and services versus having to do something a bit more dramatically different to when you're looking for new products or services in an organization?
I often think you need to force that decision early on, really, because they're very different ways of going about things and what you look for. If you want to do some sort of continuous improvement, just be honest about it, and then you can go about finding it. But if you're looking to create a new product, open a new market for yourself or something, the steps to do that are completely different. But I think the businesses usually know and understand whether they need to do that or not, and trying to be clear and explicit up front what you actually really want to do. You could do continuous improvement and dress it up as innovation, but just be honest that that's what we're going for here.
Yeah, and that's great advice. And it is a type of innovation, but with different objectives behind it.
Well, you can still have really meaningful challenges. Like, we want to cut 30% off the production time of something. That's a continuous improvement thing, but it's still a very difficult thing to create, some sort of improvement or series of them that's going to actually do that. But just be honest about it, I think, and then lean in.
Yeah,
I mean that's exactly the example that you see with some of these rocket companies or modern car production lines. They're effectively doing continuous improvement, but reducing the amount of weight per component or all these sorts of things. And so each incremental change might seem small, but the value, because it's all pushed towards a particular end goal, places these organizations, being very competitive on the market. So that's an example that resonates with me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So
go ahead,
sorry.
Gareth.
I was just going to say, what advice would you give leaders who are maybe they've got a problem that seems to be kind of growing in terms of the connections, or there's something that just seems a little insurmountable, or just it's a constant challenge that the organization hasn't been able to overcome in the past. What advice could you give leaders when they're looking at that sort of thing?
I think that the tendency is to try and come up with a really succinct problem statement, that is like 5 words long. We've got an HR problem here. It's our culture that's not right here, or human error is driving blah. And I find that it usually makes the problem feel enormous. That's that company I was alluding to earlier, where it was like, we've got to create this whole new system for the way that we allocate our skills and resources to like, you just build something that's bigger, and it kind of makes it even more frightening. Like, where are you even going to start with that? And I guess if you sort of catch yourself in that, or like you've become so vague in the description of the problem, like it's an HR problem or whatever, it's probably not the right thing, or you're sort of scratching around, or you're going to continue scratching around to find it and not feel satisfied by it. And I'd always advise just going to the other end of the spectrum of, let's make the most detailed problem statement we possibly can about this. Because you start to get into things about, well, who has this problem then? Where do they have it? When do they have it? When don't they have it? You can think about the sort of the preconditions that cause the moment where the problem is there, and what happens as a consequence. And you almost like, it's like, try and write a paragraph on this thing. Because if you think about who, there are lots of different people at different levels that are not affected the same. So Gareth, we were talking about socio-technical systems earlier, and you've got someone at the front line doing a task, whether maybe it's, cleaning the floors or something like that. The team manager's got a very different set of considerations and incentives on them. Their boss, the middle manager, is trying to juggle the direction we're heading in with managing the operations and keeping that going. And then you've got the executive that is, fearlessly and boldly taking us forward. Like, they don't want to be, caught in the weeds, but they still matter. So, who has this problem? Like, it'll affect different people differently. So let's say what that is then. And then it affects people at different times. Is this problem a problem? Like, maybe it's in the morning, but not the afternoons. Maybe it's at the sort of conception stage of a project, not at the delivery stage. Like, you can think in a few dimensions there. You can think about the impact it has on people. It might be a tangible material thing, like, they get hot, so they need more rests. But it might be something that's more, just a little bit more abstract, like, it makes them feel less engaged, because, it stops them from, being able to, get home to pick their kids up from school or whatever. But by thinking about the problem in that way, you end up with something you can do 50 things about, and not this giant big blob that you just don't know how to crack.
There was a great example in the book Six Simple Rules, where it was featuring a hotel, and there was some challenges with cleaning staff and the times that they'd clean rooms, and the effects of cleaning the room at the wrong time were not felt by the cleaning staff; they were felt by the front of house staff. So, some of the suggestions in the book was, okay, knowing that more, that broader problem statement as you're describing, then there was a chance to consider multiple different interventions on how to. And I think the one that worked was having some feedback loop between the front of house people and the cleaning staff, and they got, they arrived at that through the trial and error. So yeah, that resonates. We had Ben Lamort and Martin Kearns talking OKRs the other day, and there's been a decade-long debate in the OKR community about, do you write clearer objectives, which may be a little bit longer, or do you go for very, that 5-word description, which may be, an inspiring slogan. And some people advocate for the slogans. My preference, and I was glad to hear that Ben and Martin shared the same view, was, towards what you're saying, which is get clearer on what the actual problem is and what progress towards addressing it would be. So is that along the lines that you're thinking?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. Gareth, do you want to?
I was just going to say, I think it's also a real skill to be able to do it. Just the way you're describing it, Rob. I think most people, I've run a lot of, like 5 whys or kind of, improvement, kind of recognizing where the problems are, root cause analysis, that sort of thing. And for a lot of people, that's not the way they think. And so, this is a learned skill. And so just those questions, the way you're framing it is so useful, I think.
Well, I think with the things like root cause analysis and so there's a range of methodologies for that. They totally have their place. Like if you come back to the start, we were talking about Dave Snowden's stuff. Like if you're in a complicated domain, a root cause analysis will really help you understand the throughput of what's happening where and what went wrong. Like it's a fantastic tool for that sort of thing, as long as you do it at the right level in the right place. But here, if we're working with complexity, you could only make sense of it looking back. So a root cause analysis is like what will kind of tell you what's probably pretty obvious, but only looking backwards in hindsight. But ultimately, building capacity for people to adapt is about lots of things that lots of people do. And so, you're thinking about that that book you were just talking about, Daniel, and so it made me think about a team I helped. They had this problem, like employee well-being is difficult to manage. Like who doesn't agree with that? Like this is hard, right? But what are you going to do about it? Like, do you even want to do something about? Like, it's kind of got that, like, oh, not me. Can that one be you? It's got that sort of feel about it. And so we just unpicked it and we said, well, what, who has this? When? Where? How? What impact does it have? And it took 30 minutes. And they had this sort of beautiful statement next, which was, it's on the one side, it was employee well-being is difficult to manage. And then we ended up with it was something along the lines of, our work has been getting busier and busier for the last few months. When our work gets busy, we get very head down doing the tasks that are in front of us right now. And that means that we make mistakes and we don't check each other's work because we're too busy doing our own. When we have to do site visits, we go out, take the pool car, but we don't get the chance to make sure it's filled up with petrol, blah, 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 when it comes back. So the next person that comes along has more work to do and they're already in a hurry. And then it went on to say things like, it's been going on for so long now that it started to affect some people in the way that they sleep. It's starting to affect some people's productivity. And we're noticing that, people that have families are more stressed than the others. It was something like that. And I just thought, like, how many things can you do about that? Like, how many? And you kind of want to go and help people, and you don't have to do this well-being program or whatever. You can actually do very specific things that people might want to do because they see the benefit in it for themselves. But you start to notice how the behaviors and actions of one has a knock-on effect to someone else, and it's not their fault. It's actually just doing what they just got to do. And by picking it out in that way, root cause analysis won't get you there, but 30 minutes and you can already start to sort of feel inspired to go and help people by changing the way work's done, not adding new things.
It's the root causes. Yep.
Jay Bloom on my other show, CTO Lifeline, we had him on as a guest, and he said, don't ask people to try and solve a problem that they can't see. And what you're describing is, talking with the individuals and finding out what actual pain and problems they're experiencing, and then starting from there as to what the interventions might be, which is very different than how a lot of change programs work, which is something conceived at the center of the organization and then sort of cascaded down. So yeah.
But it could be so fast. Like we got there in like 30 minutes.
Mhm.
And the whole mood in the room lifted because it was like people felt seen, or you could start to see something you could do, and through simple things, not let's add a new thing on. And it was similar with that company with their how do we allocate our skills and resource to projects. We need a new contracting system. God, how big's that? But when you broke it down into we have a lot of people that work here that have primary, secondary and tertiary skills and skills that they're trying to develop that we don't use or maximize in some way. So we end up with short-term decisions about who's allocated onto what that doesn't match the best set of skills for the task at hand, but also developing for future. Like it's just really cool. Like there's like 30 things you could do about that really fast.
One of the areas of friction, I think, and for the listeners, there may be some of you who have been listening along and experiencing this real time whilst we've been talking, which is there is this innate sort of rush to solve, this desire to what is an option I can pick which has high certainty, and then they might be listening to us talking about these practices, and even that 30 minutes that we're describing may seem like too much work, but there's this implied trade-off that you're describing, which is that 30 minutes could actually be saving you 6 months work, because it might be a far more targeted intervention that is more likely to actually have a payoff than these other big investments. So it's people people won't save. What's the saying? People won't save. People lose days because they're not willing to spend hours, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you find, Rob, people sometimes form habits around, they're just trying to get through the tasks and the jobs that they need to do, and they form habits around them, and then they stop seeing some of the inefficiency or just some of the frustration it may cause themselves or others, and that facilitating that process helps people to see it again. It's like when a new entrant comes into an organization and they go, why on earth are people doing this? And everybody go, oh yeah, that's right. Now that you reminded me, I felt the same way when I first started working here.
That's like the little Goldilocks zone when someone starts, isn't it? Because you could ask whatever questions you like and it's kind of fine, but only up to a certain point, isn't it? Yeah. I always thought it would be good to ask, once someone's started, they get their induction and so on, like, 2 months in or whatever, just ask them, what do you think we should have told you when we inducted you? We gave you an induction, what should we have told you? And I always think that would be quite powerful to sort of tease out the kind of things people really need to know, because sometimes it's you can learn everything about who does what where, but knowing not to bother Brian on a Tuesday afternoon because he's always grumpy because of something, like that's actually a really useful thing to know sometimes. Or if you go and see this person, always do this, like it just sort of helps grease the wheels. Like those are the bits that are really powerful sometimes. But
this reminds me of a couple of practices that I've seen in organizations. One is the concept of stay interviews rather than exit interviews. So, and if you think about it, exit interviews is always conducted when it's too late for that individual, and often they're done as a bit of a chore. Whereas organizations that are really, have a lot of care for their people, are conducting stay interviews where they're actually trying to discover, what's working, what's not working.
Mm.
And then one that we've done at Hyper, Don Smith has led some great sessions that I've been a part of, which is exploring just how people show up, when they're at their best self, their worst self, in between. So it can discover some of these things about, oh, okay, well, I know if Don is like this in a meeting, maybe maybe hasn't had his coffee, or maybe something else is on his mind. And different people have different sort of tells. So yeah, those two practices resonate. Which brings me to my question: like, what tools do you like to use?
I'm a bit of a framework floozy, really. I sort of mash up all sorts of things, but for teams, like if you're doing work with teams or trying to understand or create some momentum in a direction, I find it's really powerful to look at the problems, in the way that we were talking about earlier. And the second thing I find is creating feedback loops between people becomes very helpful. So you can be the consultant that tries to solve everything, or you could be the consultant that tries to knit people together in the way so they can solve their own problems. And I like to be that way.
That's the sustainable approach, right? Yeah, it's fantastic.
It's better for everybody, I think. I feel better. You feel like you're helping people when you're setting things up to go well for longer. Like there's that sort of capacity building. But you get those questions of, what are we set up for success here? When we make trade-offs, what ones do we have to make, and are we good with that? I quite like the question. This was a guy called Dave Moore. It says, tell me about your best day at work. Like that would be great in a stay interview, because you start to learn, this person does really well just because they got to walk in the sun today. Like that, if you know that, you send them off. But I think the thing that is important with those tools is you've got to be able to make the information flow between people. So whether that's, you can use quite a lot of collaborative tools now to be able to do that, but technology can really augment that. I think. I guess if you're thinking more in bigger changes for organizations, I quite like thinking about horizons. Because you think we're like this, we're like that. We're not just suddenly going to become like that. So what are the sort of in-between stages, the stepping stones, and I like being able to really delineate, the different stages, because sometimes it's as simple as, when we talk to our staff, they don't listen. Maybe there's, the next transition is, they show up curious, that could be your first sort of shift or horizon that you see. And so I quite like that tool. I find that quite helpful to turn big things into small stepping stones again.
You can do that sort of, we've got this longer term outcome that we're looking for, and then we can ask ourselves, like, what needs to be true for this to be true? And that sort of, you can work backwards to maybe feel out what those different stepping stones could be. Obviously, you may learn along the way, and you might change the stepping stones. But that's a great recommendation. I'm just looking at the time. The time has flown.
It has. So I've got one last question though before we try and do a summary. We usually talk about we usually try and relate these topics to AI in some way. But I'm just thinking, Rob, can you? Thinking of organizations that are adopting AI, it's quite an overwhelming change for some organizations. Can you relate some of the things we've been talking about to help leaders, teams, organizations who are undergoing those kind of changes or introducing AI that can change the way people work or their processes?
Yeah, I think AI, I was saying to you guys earlier, it's like we're still learning how to use this stuff in a way that makes sense. Like, I said earlier about how, I remember when emails first came along. I remember that. I could still hear that sound now. Ding, ding, of an email coming in. We were sort of told that it's gonna be transformative because you can pass information like that. Fax machines are dead, and you fast forward, it's only 20 odd years, isn't it? And we now go on courses to manage our inbox because it causes stress and misery, and we've got so many that we can't read. And similarly, when BlackBerries first came out, they we got all this information on the move. Our productivity is going to go through the roof, and it didn't. We kind of got a bit addicted to them, and so there's always this sort of, it's going to play out quite differently, and we have to learn how to use this stuff. And I do think AI is going to make a lot of changes to the way that work happens. But if we learn how to use it as an efficiency and effectiveness tool, it will save us a lot of time. But you still need people to learn how to synthesize information, because otherwise you won't know what good looks like in 10 years' time. Secondly, you really need to check and clarify what comes out of any sort of AI that you use, because it's the computer's ideas and synthesis. You've still got to tie it to your context, make it meaningful, check it's right, which is it's like a new task for us to add in, that didn't exist before. So this is a new thing for people to do to interface. But also, if it's going to save you that much time, I mean, who cares unless you actually use it for something useful? So, if I used an AI tool to synthesize a whole bunch of documentation. It probably would have taken me like 2.5, 3 days to do it, and I got it done in half a day. So I then had a choice. Like, what do I do with this time? Do I go out on my mountain bike, or but spending that time developing the relationships between the people that were going to run this project, so that they better understood where we were going and what the contributions were, like that. It freed up the time to be able to do that, and do that sooner in the project, which is, I guess, you got to use that free capacity for something that AI can't do. And so I see the opportunity in it as freeing up our cognitive capacity to spend it on the things that we want to, that are actually going to add value, grow our understanding of the ways that we do things. And that feedback loop, that cycle, can happen faster now, but only if we choose to step into it in that way.
Yeah,
It's a great point, Rob, and I've put up the link to the course that Gareth, myself, and the aforementioned Don Smith have collaborated on, from assisted to agentic AI development, because that takeaway about how do you use the time that you free up with the tools is one that Don makes some great points about. Like, it's not just about faster software. Can you produce higher quality, and what are the practices and the ways you might be able to use those tools to get that result? This has been a fascinating chat, and we really could do a whole another hour. I've got an invading co-host here with a cat that has just been let into the house and joined me, so this might be a good time to say thank you very much, Rob. We've really enjoyed the conversation.
Oh,
Yeah,
this
it
has
was
been
great.
cool. Enjoyed this. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think my kind of key takeaway was just, if you feel like you've got an insurmountable problem, then asking the right questions and being really precise in terms of what that problem is can sometimes make it into a much smaller, maybe more small problems, but they're easier to tackle. So yeah, great advice.
Nice.
Cheers.
Thanks, Gareth.
Until
Yeah,
next
thanks, Tom.
time.
Yeah.
See you later.
Thanks, folks.